Good evening and welcome to Beaches Watch's March community meeting. We're very excited that you're here. I'm Maria Mark, President of Beaches Watch and your host for this evening's meeting. Before we get started with our guest speaker, Scott Dudley from the Florida League of Cities, I just have a few announcements to make. The meeting, of course, is being videoed, and you would be able to watch it on our YouTube channel, Beaches Watch 2012, or access it on our website. We are always looking for members to join or renew their membership, so it's $15 for individual, $20 for family, and $5 for students. The membership runs from January through December, and you can renew your membership or make a donation online at beacheswatch.com, or our ladies in the back, the sign-in table, would be glad to take your money tonight. Do we have any elected officials besides Sandy Golding, Jacksonville Beach City Council? Anyone else want to be? And let's see, we have some meetings coming up. It looks like Atlantic Beach is starting their charter review. They're having their first committee meeting Thursday, March 23 at 6 p.m. and that will be in the chambers at City Hall. Jacksonville Beach, the Land Development Code Workshop will be held on Thursday, March 23rd at 5:30. The topics will include Land Development Code supplemental standards, and that will be at the Jacks Beach City Council chambers. The Jacksonville Beach Citizen Information Academy starts. It'll start on Thursday, April 12th. It goes from 6 to 8:30. It's every Thursday for 5 weeks. And what this is designed to do is to bring participants behind the scenes of city government operations and show them what is involved in delivering and maintaining services that they expect as citizens and businesses in our community. So this is different from the Police Academy. Is this a new program they have now?
Yes, it's new, and if anybody wants to sign up, you can go to the website, and it's on jacksonvillebeach.org. On the homepage, they have a form, and you can sign up for the class.
Great.
Yeah.
That's really great, because as citizens, we don't really see what's going on behind the scenes. So it might give us a little more patience when we're dealing with, and we know what they're dealing with, okay? Let's see. So as part of our community service, we sent, we did the Jacksonville Fair Candidate Forum, and that was videoed, and we also sent them written questions. The video is up on our website, beacheswatch.com, and their responses will be posted by Friday, March 3rd. That was the deadline. We also sent written questions to the Jacksonville City Council candidates at large, and their responses will be posted on our website Monday, March 6th. As you can see, there was a large number of candidates running at large, and they are listed on our website if you wanted to see who they are. I won't read all their names right now. Our upcoming meeting in April, we are still working on that topic, so it'll be a surprise. So save the date though. That'll be Wednesday, April 5th, and this will be back at the Beaches Library. So that's all for the announcements, unless there's anything from the floor. Birthdays, jokes? Okay. Well, we are now ready to hear from Scott Dudley, who is from the Florida League of Cities. He is their Director of Field Advocacy. Scott is going to talk to us about what our 2023 legislative session bills that are coming up will have an impact on us at the beach, for positive or negative. So we will also have a Q&A following Scott's presentation, and I'll turn it over to Scott.
There you go.
Scott Dudley.
I am Scott Dudley. I'm with the Florida League of Cities. So the League of Cities, just so you all know, we have 411 cities in the state of Florida. Every city in Florida is a member of the Florida League of Cities. Think of us as essentially like the Dental Association or the Medical Association or the Home Builders Association for cities. We basically represent cities. We do training for them. We do ethics training. We do like the city clerks, the city managers, the city treasurers, all that kind of stuff. We do training for all of them. So any function that really that touches a city, the league, we do training for those individuals. The Parks and Rec people, we bring people together and share ideas about what's happening in the cities. When a problem pops up, like years ago there was internet cafes, if you remember, cities get together and we talk about that. That was like we'd hold workshops, and we even did Zoom calls back then, but it wasn't called Zooms, they were just conference calls. Just trying to bring people together to talk about issues that cities are facing and try to help solve them. We also, for smaller cities, will kind of, a short description, an easy description is kind of co-sign a loan for them for smaller cities that can't afford to pay the interest on, because you get better interest rates if you're getting a bigger loan. So we'll put 6 or 8 smaller cities together and co-sign a loan for them and then divide up the money for them. It's a small city loan program. We do, as I said, ethics training. We do, I run an organization called the League of Mayors. We do federal lobbying. Pretty much anything a city does, we're engaged in. And we've been around for 100 years. We've been since 1922 we were founded. Our primary goal was to deal with the legislature. The mission is we still primarily deal with the legislature, but in 1968, the mission became a little bit different in that they adopted something called home rule in the Constitution for the state of Florida, which means that we used to have to go to Tallahassee and lobby for, if the city of Jacksonville Beach wanted to change the speed limit out on a road, they had to go to the legislature to do it. That's called Dillon's Rule. It's a pretty archaic way of doing things, a pretty good way to bog down in all the minutiae of a city. If the city wanted to change its land use code, they had to go to the legislature. The citizens of the state of Florida said that's ridiculous, that's silly that the legislature's spending all that time doing that. So they passed what's called a home rule amendment, which means that cities are pretty much allowed to rule to dictate what is with input from their from their citizens, that we're allowed to basically develop the rules and regulations for our cities. And the League of Cities, we like to think of a good city, and I don't know of a bad city in the state of Florida. There's certainly, but they do so. They figure out ordinances and rules and regulations with the input of the business community, the civic groups, both groups like this, just the neighborhood watch groups, all the different kind of inputs. And they take that and they synthesize it. They balance out the wants, needs, and desires of the citizens of the city with what's possible in the budget, with what's possible in terms of what's allowed with their land use code. You may say, well, I don't want this piece of property to be developed into a Walmart or whatever, Pico Brady's or whatever it is. But if it's already zoned that way and somebody has applied to use the land as it's zoned, there's not really a whole lot that a city can do if they previously, before somebody applies, if they want to try to change the zoning and do all that, they can do that. But even that, the legislature has put in place some obstacles to that. The Burt-Harris law, which basically is kind of like a taking type of an issue that you're saying that a person can't use their property in the way that they want to use it. So there's all these hurdles, but basically the other thing, the Home Rule Amendment in 1968 is that the legislature always gets to, there's very few constitutional amendments that are completely self-implemented. Typically the legislature gets to write the rules about how a constitutional amendment is implemented. And in this instance, they implemented the home rule provision by saying that cities have this power to do their municipal corporate business, except if unless the legislature passes a law that conflicts with the municipal law, and then the state legislative law overrules the municipal. That's called a preemption. And they used to use preemptions in a very sparing way. They would use it basically if they felt like that an area needed a statewide regulation, water quality standards, having a standard of water quality that no city could go below was an instance where we said, yeah, that makes sense. Internet cafes was another example of where they preempted local governments, but it made sense because the state was figuring out what's gambling, what's not gambling. If it's considered gambling, it's clearly in the state realm because local governments aren't allowed to regulate gambling and that kind of stuff. So there are some preemptions that make sense, and the legislature used to use that language that I talked about that said unless a state law conflicts with local government, then the local governments can do whatever. But in the last 8 to 10 years, the legislature has been using that preemptive power as a bludgeon. They've been using it not as a means of last resort, but as a means of if there's any problem in the state that somebody goes to the legislature with, any special interest that has any problem at all in a particular city or county, the legislature goes in and enacts a law, one size fits all, to, quote, fix a problem that's not really a problem in a lot of ways, and it's not really a fix. Typically what they do is they just say, all right, cities, you can't regulate this, so they end up actually leaving a void in the regulatory scheme where neither the state's regulating it nor the local governments. They're just it's the wild, wild west out there. You look at vacation rentals, big issue that's happening around the state right now. I'll just tell you straight up, the League of Cities, we're agnostic in terms of whether, kind of ironic how we use that word in the church, sorry. We're agnostic as to whether cities have vacation rentals or not. We don't care. What we care about is that you as citizens have some input into that, and that cities, if your citizens are saying that we don't want vacation rentals all over the city, or we want to confine them to a certain area of the city, that's what the city should be able to do, and not have some legislator that's never stepped foot in your town making the rules and regulations about vacation rentals for your town, about land use decisions, because that is clearly a local decision that you all have to live with, and they don't have to. They're probably living in some HOA that says we don't allow vacation rentals in this HOA, so they don't have to deal with the problem. But if you don't live in an HOA, too bad, so sad. You're going to have to listen to the legislators, the legislative rules on that. Give you a couple of examples. A couple of years ago, 2 years ago, the city of Key West, a bunch of people were getting off cruise ships, and the cruise ships kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the city of Key West had a referendum from their citizens, and the citizens voted overwhelmingly. It was like 78% of the citizens voted that they needed to limit the number of people that were getting off the ships into the downtown area, into Key West, because the infrastructure, frankly, is really old down there. There's still a lot of septic tanks. They're trying to get away from those, but it floods easy. People are getting up. I don't know about you, but I don't behave the same when I'm on vacation as I do when I'm sad to admit that, but it's probably true. I probably drink a beer or two more than I might, or maybe it may not behave in the same way. So they were getting, imagine 5,000 people a day getting off ships, and the mess that they were leaving behind in Key West. So the citizens got together and said, we don't want that, we want to limit the number. Well, the legislature, in their supreme power that they have, said, we don't care that you, the citizens of Key West, don't want that many people getting off the ships. We're going to make you have that many people get off the ships. So they preempted the decision of a referendum, a local referendum on that very issue, and said, we don't care. We're gonna dictate it. Who drove that? It was the cruise ship industry, which is the legislature. And so what's happening is the legislature the special interests are learning that they can go to Tallahassee instead of working things out at the local level and trying to negotiate and figure out like what used to happen. And like I said, there were some preemptions in the past. One of them was smoking in public parks. The tobacco industry did that 20 years ago to local governments. Just said, well, we're powerful, we run the legislature, we're not going to allow regulation of smoking in public parks. We undid that last year. I'll talk about a little bit how we did that last year. Yeah, there were some preemptions in the past that kind of overrode local control, but there was always a general respect for the idea that the citizens in the community knew best what was best for their community, and that mindset is going away. And the legislators are more and more just taking on really essentially local issues and passing statewide laws relating to local issues. And I'm going to talk about some of those, and you'll be amazed at some of what you hear about what they're trying to do this session. So let me dive into that. And I don't know, do you want me to wait for questions to the end, or do you want to wait for questions to the end? So I'll do that. The light's smoky. Am I hitting the right forward button? Okay, all right, cool. Am I crooked or is it? Okay, that's crooked, I think. All right, cool. I'm not crooked for sure. So this is the League's legislative team, and really what I'm just trying to show is that we have a lot of folks sitting around reading legislation. I can just hit the buttons here. Some sheets of paper with notes on it. Sorry. I just got off the road. I'm like catching up. So this is the League's legislative team. We have a lot of people. This is part of the team. This is the folks that go to the state capitol on a regular basis. This is the rest of the legislative affair teams. We do federal as well. Field Advocacy is a new program we started. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. That's my bailiwick. But you can see we have an awful lot of folks that read. There's probably about 5,000 bills filed each year. We read them all. We see if there's any impact or potential impact on cities, and we try to make sure that we put them on our list. We end up following probably 700 or 800 bills a year that either have a direct impact or what we call in legislative parlance is could be used as a vehicle, meaning they deal with something that a section of law that they could amend in a good way or a bad way, but would still affect cities. Typically, what we've been dealing with is they're amending it in a bad way. So we're trying to be alert to what vehicles are out there, and we try to do that. So key bills affecting municipalities, and I've tried to include maybe let's that. Can you all see that? Okay. Yeah, we'll get to it. So this is going to sound like a really esoteric one, but I want you to understand why it's important. So cities and counties have what they call sovereign immunity. The state has sovereign immunity too. And basically the legal concept behind it is you can't sue the king. And local governments and the state are king. Not that we really are, but that's the legal concept behind it is you can't sue the king. That there's a lot of stuff that we do that is inherently dangerous. We have police and firefighter departments, and we have roller skate parks, and we have skateboarding parks, and we have a bunch of stuff that people sometimes get hurt with. And the idea is that limiting the exposure to cities, because if you don't limit the exposure, then the amount of lawsuits, basically cities would be broke, counties would be broke, the state would be broke immediately. So there's legislation out there that is currently the caps on the lawsuits. It's not that you can't sue, but they've capped at $300,000 and $300,000 per person, and it's $200,000 per person and $300,000 per incident. So let's use a really sad example because it's unfortunately really relevant in the news right now, of a shooting. If the government somehow did something that led to that they're somehow liable, then each person would be limited to receiving $200,000 and individually, and then $300,000 cap per incident. Those limits haven't been changed since 2011. We think probably that those limits ought to be looked at and changed, and whatever's fair. But what the legislature did this year is they filed a bill that said no caps anymore. So there's this thing, and it's really archaic, and I don't want to get into the weeds too much on it, but there's this thing called claims bill, where if you sue the local government, a government, any governmental entity, and you win, and it's over these caps, the amount that is awarded is over these caps, the legislature has to pass a bill that allows the city or the county or the state to pay out over that limit. The legislature doesn't like the claims bill process because it's inherently political. If you have a really good lobbyist, sometimes you get your claims bill paid. If you don't have a really good lobbyist, or if they just say, you know what, that person is a scumbag and we don't want to pay them even if the state's wrong. I mean, they do that sometimes. They're like, well, that person did a bunch of terrible stuff, so we're not going to pay them. So they're trying to get out of the process of making these decisions. They're inherently political. They inherently make somebody mad, some constituent group mad. So they're like, we don't want it, it's a hot potato, we want to get that off our plate. And so instead of fixing the claims bill process like they should do, and make it less political and maybe have a smaller group that looks at it and like a special master type of a thing, they're basically just saying, we're going to do away with the caps. So as they came out with the House at the beginning of this year filed a bill, and it did away with the caps on sovereign immunity, which means that local governments, the state, everybody could get, well, they left themselves out of it. That's the key part, is they left the state out of it. They could maintain the sovereign immunity for the state, but for cities and counties, they said that you could sue to whatever amount the jury awarded. There were no caps in place. They subsequently amended that bill to be $2.5 million per person and $5 million per incident. So that's still really high. As I indicated, we believe that there probably needs to be some ups. Since it hasn't changed, there's been a lot of cost of living has gone up. Maybe we're open to having a discussion about what the new limits should be, but we don't think they should be. They should go either to no caps or to 2.5 million and 5 million. That's a lot. The reason I talk about that is what that does, what that means for you all as taxpayers, is that if the cities and counties are on the hook for that much money, first of all, the insurance rates for the cities and counties are going to go through the roof. If you think, we know with storm damage and everything else, they're already paying higher insurance premium theirs. And now, look at what's going to happen when they raise those caps in terms of what they can get sued for and how much they can get sued for. Insurance is going to become a major expense for cities and counties, and it either is going to mean that they're going to have cities and counties are going to have to raise your taxes, which we're going to get to why that's going to be even harder to do if they pass another piece of legislation. And that's the other thing, is that some of these like at the local level and you in your own household, you make decisions. You say, well, we want to go to Japan this year. So we're going to have to save some money. We're not going to buy a new car this year because we're going to go to Japan. It's going to cost a lot of money. Well, the legislature, when they have these ideas, they go, well, we'll just pass them both and we'll see what works, because they don't consider that one is going to impact the ability to do the other. And so when I talk about this other piece of legislation about lowering the homestead exemption caps, that the ability for local governments to pay for some of these damages under sovereign immunity is going to be completely adversely affected. So that's one of them. Another bill, talk about shade meetings. This is actually a good one. I'll try to give some good examples too. So right now, under current law, you know about sunshine law, is that basically two members of the city council or your county commission can't get together and talk about an issue privately. They're just not allowed to do it. There's a couple of really minor exceptions to that. But what this does is, if, for instance, if somebody is suing under the Burt Harris, or if they're want to sue the local government over land use decision. Right now, the local government has to meet in public, so the opposing council can sit in on the meeting and say, okay, that's their strategy. We've just heard what they're going to do. And so this would allow local governments to meet in the shade. They would have to take notes, and at some point those notes, after the court hearing, those notes would have to be made available, so it's called shade. It's not completely in the dark, but it does make some sense to allow local governments to meet privately and discuss, all right, what's our strategy here? What's the best? And they can't do that now, so we like that one. A couple of others. These are monitors and supports. I'll skip to some of the bad stuff. There's a good bill. It's really comprehensive. It does include a piece that we're not in love with. Affordable housing is a big issue in the state of Florida. So this piece of legislation, House Bill 627 and Senate Bill 102, fund all the current, the SHIP, it's the State Housing Initiative Partnership, the SAIL, State Affordable something, I forget, but anyway, there are all these different programs for affordable housing. And a lot of years, in the years past, the last 15 or so years, they did not do it last year, so prior to last year, the legislature, there's these trust funds, and it comes from when you sell your house or a piece of property, there's a small little tax that goes on that, and they put that into a fund for affordable housing. But in the last few years, the legislature's been taking those affordable housing funds and putting them into the general budget. They've been doing what they call a sweep. So there's this trust fund that there's no trust for. They actually are just sweeping the funds from this fund that they're saying, oh, we're going to use this for affordable housing, and then they don't. They've been sweeping those funds. This bill would actually say for the next 10 years that they would not do it, and they actually fully fund each of those affordable housing, the apartment, rental assistance, down payment assistance, all those type of programs. You remember last year that the legislature passed something to do called the Hometown Heroes legislation that dealt with housing for police, firefighters, teachers, all that kind of stuff. They're expanding that to allow not just to apply to police, firefighters, teachers, those, but really anybody below a certain percentage of federal poverty level. So that's a good thing. And they're changing it to allow the police, firefighters, the hometown hero pieces, hometown hero folks can now, they don't have to just, it can't just, right now it's limited to them buying their first house. But this is if they want to buy subsequent houses, not as rental properties, not that. They have to homestead the property. So it's if they want to move from where they initially bought and move into a bigger house because their family is growing, it would allow that. So we are in favor of that. It does include one provision that some folks have some concern about. The League of Cities we're neutral on this particular position because only 5 cities in the state of Florida have rent control provisions, and we figure for all the good that's in that bill that we're willing to give up the idea of having cities allow rent control issues. So there's only about 5 cities in the state that are affected by that. We've talked to those 5 cities. They know where our position is, and they're kind of like, yeah, you know what? For all we're getting in terms of the dollars that we're going to be getting for helping the affordable housing, it's probably a pretty decent turnout for the most part. So there is another bill. This one's really bad. And what it does is it expedites building permit processes. And everybody probably says, well, yeah, we should expedite building permit processes, except for we already did that a couple of years ago. And your local governments are already, they're competing. Your city that you live in and the county that you live in are already competing against other cities and counties to make sure that people will come move there, that the business climate is friendly, that they're doing stuff because there's a lot of growth happening, and people want people to come to their city or to their county, or they want them to bring jobs to their community. And so cities are already doing that. Not only that, the legislature 5 years ago, we worked with them and we said, all right, here's some timelines, and if the developer doesn't meet this timeline, then they go to the back of the line. This bill undoes all the agreement that we just did 5 years ago, and it says right now things are based on business days. This bill has us have to work with calendar days. Well, imagine, if you will, if somebody turns something in on Wednesday of Thanksgiving week, okay, and we have 10 days to respond. Well, we've lost Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. 4 of the 10 days are gone. So that would mean then that those 6 days that we have left to review that permit, if we don't get it approved, it would be deemed to be approved. If we don't get it finished, it would be deemed to be approved, which is really bad, because what it means is the whole Surfside thing in terms of that building collapsing, there'd be a lot more of that going on in the state, because we wouldn't be able to necessarily go out and inspect it in a timely fashion. We wouldn't be able to really review the plans in a way that we need to. We think there's a good balance now, and we think that cities are doing everything they can. Cities and counties are doing everything they can. We've even allowed, we agreed years ago to allow the developers to go out and hire private inspectors, that they can hire their own inspector. And it's off the books in terms of that money doesn't go to the city. We get like just a percentage cut just because we have to go look at what the inspector did, but it's all expedited. So I mean, we've been really trying to work with the building community in terms of trying to help, recognizing Florida's growing. There's a lot going on, and so this bill though undoes all that. We're really concerned about some of the timelines in it. The other issue is that there's 2 areas, really 3 areas, where we're having a really hard time hiring people. And building inspectors is one of them. There's just not enough building inspectors in the state of Florida right now. It is really hard there's competition, people are paying more and more and more, trying to up the salaries. But the building inspectors themselves, if you talk to the Building Officials Association of Florida, BOAF, they're having a hard time recruiting people into that industry. It's kind of like teaching and a couple other professions, police and fire and some other professions, where people just aren't wanting to go into that profession. So and there's a lag time for that. And so we're not going to cure that problem overnight by just jacking up salaries. You had to have people go through the training, the school, all that kind of stuff, get trained and get up to speed on it. Wastewater treatment operators is another area that cities and counties, we can't find people to work in those fields, and so we're doing all we can to try to expedite that. That's another bill, by the way, that we're supporting in terms of trying to incentivize people to get into those fields. But so this bill is bad because the time frames that they're putting on means that there's going to be an awful lot of shoddy building going on, and there's not going to be anything that local governments are going to be able to do with it about it. The other thing that this bill does is, a couple of years ago, the legislature, they're kind of just going back and reneging on a bunch of these agreements that we had. There was an effort a few years ago to say that it basically limited a local government's ability to have a say in the design standards. So if you live in, for instance, Coral Gables, is an example I love to use, because Coral Gables has a very unique look. They have the Spanish architecture. There's a look in Coral Gables that you have to conform with that look. If you're going to build something, it has to look like it belongs in Coral Gables. There's a lot of other cities like that have standards that you have to kind of just like, this is what our citizens want this city to look like. And the citizens have gone, and when people try to build something that doesn't look like that, the citizens raise heck, and the city says, we told you couldn't do that. Well, they're trying to undo that agreement that we had, that the agreement that we reached about 5 years ago was that there were some instances that if we had architectural review architectural review boards in place, that they couldn't preempt us on that. But now they're going back and saying, too bad, we don't have our architectural review boards in place or not. We're going to not allow the city to have any say in the design standards. That's bad, because your city, it's a great little city. It has a certain feel, it has a certain look, and cities are looking for that all across the state, and we think that's just bad. It becomes McMansion USA, and who wants to live there, right? I mean, trying to skip through some of these. Vacation rentals, there's a piece of legislation out there. We're monitoring this one. The reason is, this bill is pretty innocuous right now. It brings DBPR in on some stuff that allows local governments to do it clarifies some stuff that they can already do, but it makes it more clear that they can do it. The problem is that we don't believe that that's the way the bill is going to end up looking. We think that they're going to go in the opposite direction. People sometimes file a bill to make it in a real innocuous way, and then they pile a bunch of stuff in the last days of session when people don't have time to read a 200-page strike all that comes out at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're taking it up at 10 o'clock in the morning. Pretty hard to get through a bill at that hour and in those 2 hours, and they'll go and change everything that the direction the bill is going, that we've been working on all session long. In the final days, they'll change it all and make it not look anything like it. And so we're monitoring some of those vacation rental bills that are out there. Right now, they're fairly innocuous, but we're concerned that they're not going to remain innocuous. We want to make sure you get the cybersecurity piece for our cities, that there's money for the state's putting up, and if you don't have that, you may want to take a picture of that and get your grant application in. Cybersecurity is a really big issue right now, as you may know. People, they only have to be right once when they're trying to scam you. We have to be right 100% of the time. We've been working with the state trying to build dollars and trying to help citizens become more protected against the cyber thieves out there, the bad guys, and so but also helping local governments get better equipped for that also. There is this bill, House Bill 439. This is a mess. I'll just be really blunt with you. So it is basically, I'm sorry, if there's developers in the room, my dad was a developer. I'm not against developers per se, but what I am against is when there's a set of rules to play by and somebody doesn't like the rules, so instead of working it out at the local level, that they go to Tallahassee and they say, Mr. or Mrs. Legislator, we need to change the entire laws all around the state of Florida because I'm not getting the answer I want from one particular local government. And that's what this bill does, House Bill 439. It does away with a lot of things. It changes the definition of urban sprawl in a way that almost eliminates the definition of urban sprawl. It does away with the definition of, it changes the definition of density in a way that basically allows for way more density in cities that may not want density, intensity, urban sprawl. It does some things dealing with basically land use decisions are being kicked up to Tallahassee instead of being held at the local level. That's kind of a short description of what that bill does. That's pretty important, and I would urge you to get on the league's website. I'll give you all that information in a minute. I'm trying to get through a lot of bills, so if you have questions at the end, I can answer some of them. But I'm trying to at least put you on alert, put you on notice that there's some bad stuff out there. House Bill 729. This may or may not matter to a lot of you. I know for cities it matters, but this bill would do away with what's called local preferences. And right now, again, like 3 years ago, we struck a deal that if the state's paying for the majority of the project, if it's a wastewater treatment plant, the state's paying for the majority of it, then the state should be able to say whether we can use local preferences or not. But if the local government is paying for it, we ought to be able to say whether we want to use, whether we give extra points to a business that's located in our community, that's part of our local chamber of commerce, that's hiring our friends and neighbors, that's sponsoring baseball teams or basketball teams, or putting on the fireworks display, that's part of the community. And this bill would do away with that ability to have any type of a local preference. We think that's bad, especially it's the local government's dollars, it's the taxpayers' dollars, obviously, I know that, but it's your community, and if there's a business in your community that's a good corporate citizen and doing a lot of good stuff, and when it comes time to compare bids and you give them a point extra for that, we think that's a pretty reasonable thing to do because it's all about community. And so that's, we think that's a fair approach. The legislature wants to do away with that. Ironically enough, they're not doing away with the state preference. So they're keeping, if you're in the state of Florida and you're a business, they're not saying, well, we're going to let businesses in from Georgia and Alabama and wherever. They're keeping their own state preference, but they think it's bad for local governments to have their own local preference. So just the inconsistency, or there's other words for that too, hypocrisy. So that's a kind of a quick wash on where we are with the bills. I will tell you that there's been about 1,300 bills filed thus far. That means that we're not even halfway there yet in terms of other bills that are in the pipeline that are coming down. Typically, as I said, there's typically about 5,000 bills filed per session. The League of Cities, we typically watch anywhere from 700 to 1,000 of those. We're not asking you all to pay attention to 700 to 1,000 bills. All those people that I showed you at the beginning are going to be doing that. But what I am encouraging you to do is I handed you out that Local Voices United page. And what we're doing with that program is a program that the League is doing. And what we're trying to do is find 4 or 5, we think, like that growth management bill where the state's taken over the land use decisions for cities. That's something that you as a citizen would be really interested in. And so we're going to cull out 3 or 4 really, really important bills that are going to affect your ability to have a say in what's going on in your own city. And we think that's bad, that they're taking that authority away from you. They think they're taking it away from local governments, the legislature does, but we remind them constantly that the cities are the citizens. Like I said, a good city is a reflection of the business community, the civic groups, the neighborhood groups, the beaches watch groups, all these folks that you're here tonight, a bunch of other places you could be, and you're involved in your community, and a good city is a reflection of all the things that you're doing. And the legislature ought to not be running roughshod and taking your voice away from you. And when they preempt you, when they're preempting local governments, that's what they're doing, is they're taking away your voice. And that ought to be pretty distressing for you, to be very frank with you. That you ought to be dictating what's going on in your own community instead of having some legislator that maybe has never stepped foot in your community or couldn't even point to it on a map, dictating what's going on in your community. And so that Local Voices United, if you belong to a Elks Lodge, Moose Lodge, Water Buffalo, I mean, that's a real thing. I know Fred Flintstone was a Water Buffalo. But any of those groups, Rotary, Civitan, Kiwanis, I'm happy to come talk to your group about what's going on and the preemption and what's going on in terms of them stripping the authority away from citizens in the local communities and centralizing power in Tallahassee. It's a bad thing. Centralized power is never a good thing. So I think we can all agree with that. If one person's calling all the shots, then that means your voice doesn't really matter very much, and we don't like that. With that, I'm happy. I talked a lot, but I'm going to answer any question you have about really anything.
Yeah, I apologize coming.
How you doing? Good seeing you.
You know what? Last time I saw you, we were sitting together at the.
Yeah, I had a heart attack.
Yeah, you and I were sitting in the emergency room at Beaches Hospital. So I'm
Yes.
glad you're up and roaring. I apologize getting here late because other stupid people went to the other location. And when you get old, you get set in your ways.
Yes.
I think you would have more people. We just didn't read it, clearly. My question is, I apologize if you've covered this, but House Bill 102. Is the Florida League of Cities supporting the House Bill 102? And if you spoke about that, I apologize, but I have a 2-part question. So number 1 is... Can
you remind me of the topic of that?
Yeah, it's a topic about, sets the rules about if you're within 500 feet or if you're a housing and 60% is within the housing, that someone can build a high-rise that is just as high as the high-rise within it. So
That's the housing bill.
That's the housing bill, yes.
the housing, which by the way, when you read the bill, it's actually misleading, and when you read it, it makes you go, wow, what is this? But when you deeply read into it, it will affect us here at the beaches about who And by the way, this group was formed about height limits. And
So
my
we are.
question is, what is the stance of the Florida League of Cities?
Thanks for asking that question, and good to see you again. Thank you. He literally helped save my life. So I was at a league meeting at Jacksonville Beach, and I like everyone says, "Oh, you should call the ambulance." I was like, "Nah, I'm fine." I wasn't fine. I ended up having quadruple bypass as a result of that, and I was headed out to go surfing when I was finished with that meeting, and he would not let me do that. He called the ambulance, and I stayed here in Jacksonville for 2 weeks and had open heart surgery. So it's kind of intense. So thank you.
I'm just glad I
Appreciate
didn't
it.
have to get off and out.
Good decision. Good decision on your part. I'm glad I didn't listen to myself. I was like, no, it's just indigestion. I'm fine. I want to go surfing. It was beautiful waves, and like the doctor's like, the only surfing you're doing is on the internet because you had a heart attack, buddy. And then anyway. So we are supporting it, and let me tell you why. Is that, and your concern is a really legitimate one, but it's about the height. And so basically, we think that the restrictions that are on that particular provision, and I'll talk to you about some
I'm
of those.
sorry, I couldn't hear you. Did you say you are supporting?
We are supporting it. Let me tell you why. So first of all, there's a bunch of funding in it for affordable housing. Secondly, with that height, so what the bill says is that you can build on a commercially zoned piece of property to the highest building within a mile radius in your city, that you can build to that height. But it says that we think that the way this is going to be used is such a limit, and we've talked to a lot of city managers, and if you guys if your city wants to weigh in and talk to us differently, we're open to that. We're just hearing what we're hearing, and so it says that, I may not have the numbers exactly right because I don't remember all the specific language of the bill, but it says largely that, let's see, height restrictions for this, but maximum limits of developments within a mile radius, and that the developer has to set aside 40% of the units that they're going to build in that high density, that higher elevation building as affordable housing units, and it's based on the AMI, basically the federal limit for poverty level, essentially. And so they can do it, but they have to reserve 40% of the units for affordable housing.
Okay, so my point is, being local, and I'll sit down after this.
No, you're great.
Is San Pedro Towers is right down the street. It probably falls in that same category. If the McDonald's next to it decided to sell their property, that Jacksonville Beach would have no authority stopping someone to come in and build another, and I'm not saying they're for it or against it, but they could come in next door and build it just as high. So
We're talking
As long as they're reserving 40% of the units.
Right, 17 stories, but 40%, they're all affordable housing. But my deal is to you is, and I'm going to put the tough question with you. As a home rule hero, that I supported that, I'm publicly saying I am so disappointed in the Florida League of Cities to support this bill, because this is preemption in violation of any home rule for any of the cities, and I don't get it. And I'm not attacking you.
No, it's fine.
But I have a lot of respect for you.
Yeah, we're fine. So let me tell you a couple of things about this. So first of all, it's the Senate President's priority. Okay, Kathleen Passanello, and that the politics of that matters a little bit in terms of that coming out swinging hard against the Senate President's priority right out of the gate is probably not the best way to get anything else that we want to during the course of session. We also felt that with the increased funding, the guaranteed funding for the next 10 years for all the other programs, and the restriction in terms of it has to be within a mile it has to be within a mile of whatever, like if that building is 2 miles away, they can't build it that high. But if it's within a mile, they can build it. But again, they have to preserve 40% of the units for affordable housing, and there's another provision in there that they have to, let's see. Yeah, and they have to keep it for at least 30 years as affordable housing. So they can't say it's affordable housing and then sell it in a year and say, oh, too bad, now we're going to make the money on it. So we figured that we are looking at an affordable housing crisis in the state of Florida. We did our math. We've heard, honestly, you're not the only city official or former city official that's told us our position's out of whack. We basically took a vote of our board, and that's what they said that they wanted to do. I would love to talk to you more about that, and you know, it was a very hard call, and so, but we did come down on the side of supporting it. And I hear you loud and clear about your concerns. I understand that.
And I will say this to you, all fairness to the Florida League of Cities, I understand that you have to strategize and see who to go and what, and when the Speaker of the Senate supports this bill, and it is on fast track. I've never seen a bill go through committee so fast.
Exactly.
It will be passed the first week of legislature.
Right.
And so I get
Right.
why you traded. I'm just curious. It could affect us here at the beaches, and that's my concern. That's
I hear
all.
you, and
And
thank
I'm not
you for.
against-
I appreciate. Hey, we're cool. I mean, no problem at all, and I understand your concern. We just did the math and just figured that in terms of what it was giving versus what we were losing, how limited that could be used. We talked to a lot of city managers, and they're like, look, and planning departments, and they said, look, we don't have, you know, the idea that somebody's going to give up 40% of their units for affordable housing on the beaches. That's a lot of the revenue loss on that is a pretty big deal, and so we'll have to see how it plays out. But I do hear you loud and clear, and I appreciate your input on that. And I'd love to. It won't be the only position we've taken in the last 10 or 15 years that some of our members say, "What, you're doing what?" But at some point, we have to do the political calculus and figure, like you talked about, like you just said, it is going to pass. And so we could either stand in the way of the train tracks and get run over and then get nothing else this session, or we could work with them. And they listened to a lot of our concerns. The original draft of the bill was way worse. It was like 10% of the units. We made them go way up. I mean, we got a lot of concessions on this. And so it's really hard for us to get all those concessions and then say, well, we don't support it anyway. Because then nobody wants to work with us at all.
I don't get it at all, I must say. I mean, shouldn't there be the geographical facts be considered in that? I mean, a mile diameter, that means half a mile out into the sea, into the ocean. I mean, you said it applies to businesses. So we have the hotel buildings there. They are like, I don't know, 12, 14 stories high. So that means everything that is within half a mile inland can be as high?
No, ma'am, not everything. Only if the land is zoned commercial. The land has to be zoned commercial already. So they can build affordable housing. They can do mixed use or affordable housing units on something that's already zoned commercial. If it's not zoned commercial, they can't do it at all. So if it's residential or some other designation, they can't do that. So it is limited in scope just to commercial properties that are zoned commercial.
Okay.
So that's the other piece that limits it down considerably too, is you're not doing it in the middle of the neighborhood.
Well, but we have an issue in Jack's Beach. We have commercial property on Pittman Road that's within 1 mile of Pelican Point, which is like 15 stories or maybe more. So that basically is saying, and that commercial area is in the middle of a residential zone. And so you could potentially put 15 stories in the middle of that residential zone because it's within 1 mile. And we already passed a restriction. Jack's Beach did, Neptune Beach did, and Atlantic Beach did, almost 20 years ago.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot. I know Flagler Beach is having the same concern you guys are. It is not necessarily a super popular decision right now, I'll tell you that, but I mean, we are in council, you've been in politics, you understand sometimes you have to, if you're gonna get run over, you might as well get something for getting run over, and we're trying to at least get something for getting run over, because we're gonna get run over on it. I mean, the Senate and the House are pushing it pretty hard, and laying across the tracks and just leaving, you know, body parts everywhere is not necessarily a great strategy. So I do understand trust me, I honestly understand your concern, and a lot of other cities have weighed in on that, but the majority of our members think that the trade-off with the funding for SHIP, and that there may not even be a need with some of all the other funding that's going in for SHIP and SAIL and all those other programs, that going to be pretty limited in terms of how many people actually avail themselves of that program, of the commercial and 40%. So, but I do hear you loud and clear. Any other questions, comments?
Go ahead. What's the source of your organization's funding?
I'm sorry?
What is the source of your organization's funding?
The source for our funding. So we have 411 cities that pay dues. That's about 3% of our budget. The rest of the budget comes from, we sell insurance to cities. We run pension programs for police and firefighters for cities. We run employee pension programs. We do the small loan program. We're super entrepreneurial, whatever. I mean, whatever a city does, we're trying to help them do it, and in some instances, like for the small loan thing, we'll take, you know, half of a point or something like that to help. Or for the running the pension program, we run a bunch of cities' pension programs, both their police and fire as well as their general employee. We sell health insurance for cities. We're sort of a broker of it. So we're trying to help, because all those things are really hard for cities to get. There's not a lot of insurers actually selling those products to cities, and so a lot of cities have to self-insure or else go through us, because we offer lower rates, and a lot probably, I think that you all are one of our customers, and so that's where we get our funding.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Thanks for asking.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
All the questions? Oh, I think our microphone's not dead. So
Yeah.
it is time. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. It's always so interesting to hear what is coming up. We usually also have you after the session to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly.
Right. And we hope we can come talk about a lot of this bad stuff done.
So we'll probably, so you would have Scott back after that. And the session starts March 7th to
And ends May 5th.
May
Be
5th.
the best Cinco de Mayo ever.
Margaritas. No, thank you. Thanks. Appreciate it. It's always good to have you. So thank you all for joining us. It's a small crowd, but a quality crowd, very attentive. Again, we are videotaping the meeting, so please check out our website tomorrow. Please pass the link on to your friends and neighbors who are not able to be here. Usually when we do have to change locations, it does kind of put a wrench into things. But next month we will be back at the library, first Wednesday of April. So we look forward to seeing you then, and we will announce our program at a later time. So good night, thank you again, and safe travels.
Remind people about voting in the Jacksonville election.
Oh yeah, vote,
Well, and watch the video
and watch the video.
Yeah.
Vote, and vote
for the
often.
mayoral candidates.
Yeah.
Yeah, please, watch the Jacksonville Mayor Candidate Forum. It was very enlightening. We had all of the candidates there, which was, we were very happy about that. So, yeah, and please share that link with your friends and family and neighbors as well. It was really an excellent forum, so. All right, anything else?